sent me. Just sent me the CD today at work, and I just had a chance to like glance and listen to a little bit before I left.
You didn't hear it all?
I listened to a bit of each song and didn't get to hear the whole thing through because I live like about an hour and a half away from the city, so I had to kind of get moving, so I could only listen to a bit of it. But it seemed really different than Aeon. At first it almost reminded me more of like Beyond the Realm of the Dying Sun. But then when I was like reading the press release, I kind of never thought of it before, but it seemed like you were moving backwards through like musical history with each album. This album seemed a lot less Renaissance and a little bit, on one end more organic and like primitive, and then also it seemed a little bit more like contemporary. It was like almost like a contrast. How do you see this album developing?
A lot of the material of It's a Labyrinth is like covers like a 2.5 year period time, like the last 2.5 years. And sometimes it's really difficult talking about a natural evolution according to decadent dance, because sometimes there's a piece from like 10 years ago that's been there in the archives that we feel, oh right, I now know how this should be, and that comes from experience, so that will get extracted and worked on accordingly. So the initial creation of the track can be that old. And the new album is a mixture of things, forays into writing music for theatrical productions. There's 2 pieces connected to Oedipus Rex, and which we did for Temenos, theatre group in Dublin, and another one we did for them was Bertolt Brecht's Mother Courage. There's 2 tracks from that film.
I like that one a lot. Is that your music? It's not
Brecht's
original
lyrics.
Music,
yeah. There was no music written for it initially, but I've always been a great fan of Kurt Weill and Brecht's collaboration, especially the track in the opera period around that time. So when I was asked to do it, I was trying to keep it in the same frame, the same German heaviness, that philosophical kind of existentialistic heaviness in a Kurt Weill and Brechtian sense.
It was kind of a conscious decision to have a more varied album style-wise.
Yeah, there was no conscious effort towards the concept.
Right.
Yeah, which was the same.
Because Aeon seemed very much more of a piece. Very much.
It's more concentrated, more focused. Definitely. But this last couple of years we took time out. That's why The Passage in Time came out initially. And continued because Lisa got married and had a child, and we decided that we'll give space for her, to devote her energies to that. And in the meantime, I worked on various projects. Our lives aren't always.
Film work.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy doing it?
I do, working with the right people. We've worked films in the past, and they've been not as pleasurable as we would have imagined it to be, because of the nature of the size and scope of films. The people that are involved in the films, from the production company right through to the technicians who are working on your behalf, right through to the director's interpretation of what the music should be. Continually redrafting music is a really wearing thing. To give you an example, we did a film in 1988, El Niño de la Luna, for Agustin Villarroel. It was an official Spanish entry for Cannes at the time. And the film was originally going to be 3 hours long. We started work. I worked on a 15-minute sequence, which took me 2 weeks to write and record. Then we get the. Sorry, we've had problems with production. They think the film's too long. Distributors aren't going to like it, so we've cut a half an hour out of the film, and suddenly your 15 minutes you've worked painstakingly on is now 10 minutes, because some of the sequences have been pulled from that. And the 15-minute piece of music doesn't work anymore, so you have to start from scratch. And it was really frustrating working with these people. So we'll only really get involved, I think, in the future with people who we can trust. But that's part of the experience of working.
How about videos? Do you enjoy doing your own videos? The only time I've ever seen one of your videos was for Frontier in that collection that I saw. And we don't see any of your videos here on MTV.
That's all there is. That's all there is.
What's that?
That's all there is. Those two videos.
I wasn't sure if some things had come out only over there. Is that something you ever think you might get more into, or visual?
Well, actually, I'm going to Los Angeles tomorrow, and during the course of next week, myself and Lisa are collaborating in the final stages of a film for the first track on the new album called Yolunga, Spirit Dance. And that's with a producer called Mark Magidson, who produced. Have you seen the film Baraka by Ron Fricke? He was director of photography for Koyana Squatsi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's a similar film to that in terms of it's an audio-visual experience, filmed in 24 countries over 14 months. So we're taking it's in 70mm, it's IMAX. It's a really impressive film. It comes on release here in October. It's one of the most amazing films I've had the fortune of being involved with.
That sounds good.
So we're taking extracts from that film. They kindly offered us access to any film footage that we want. So there will be a film for Yolunga by September.
How much does where you live, the fact that you live in a more rural setting than most people do, affect your music? Do you find it easier to concentrate, or being?
Perhaps the focus, in terms of concentration. Just step outside of the major highways of life, which you can get sucked into and become a part of very easily and lose yourself in. Like a big city like New York is a glaring example of desensitization. And I find that I can sensitize myself and gain focus very easily of being with nature, being with animals, being with water. Lisa is the same thing. We both lived in cities most of our lives for 20 years, and when we're in a situation to be self-sufficient, the first thing we did was to leave. But we couldn't agree on where we each respectively wanted to live. So I live in Ireland, she now lives in Australia.
Does that make it difficult at all to, kind of keep the band running smoothly? You're so far apart spatially.
Well, at first it was strange because we worked very closely in a typical kind of songwriting relationship up to then. And this is going back to '88. But then we realised it was probably for our best advantage in the sense that we could each pursue individually our own musical vision. It came at a good time, in fact, where we felt confident enough individually to be able to write independently of one another. And generally, what happens within the framework of a songwriting relationship is that when we feel like we have enough material to show each other, in mind to to making an album together. We come together, and out of that is the real dynamism of the record. That's where it really begins, where we turn each other on to the music that we've been making over that year period or whatever, and that's very exciting. And we put to one side that which we don't think is conducive to the album. What is conducive we keep, and out of the enthusiasm we also write original material together, like we have done in the past, and that's essentially what makes up the last 3 albums.
How much input do each of you have on the other's songs in terms of arranging?
It's a difficult one. I'd be hard pressed to try and think of it in terms of percentages.
Well, I mean, a little, a lot. The first time I ever noticed it was on Dying Sun. It seemed like your songs were on one, some songs you sang were on one side, and Lisa sang were on the other. The last album or two, it seemed more integrated. And I was wondering if it was more collaboratory.
But it's strange because during that period we were working together. Initially, so it kind of crosses over. There was a crossover. I'm doing arrangements for Lisa's music, and she's doing kind of arrangements, being involved with the things I was doing, and we never ever set out for the album to actually be as black and white as what it was. So at that stage, CD was a foreign notion to us. We're still thinking in terms of vinyl, and we actually cut the record for the sake of continuity. At the end of the day, it seemed to work better that way. And on the CD, it must feel strange. It's like,
I don't know. I just have the vinyl too, so it's always seemed to me to be very separate, two hemispheres.
Yeah.
Do you meet at each other's houses, or do you pick a neutral spot to work and record?
We have our own studio.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
Where is that?
that's in Ireland.
In Ireland.
I live in a converted church on Little Island.
We're going to a converted church tonight to a club.
Are you?
Have you heard of the Limelight?
Limelight, that's right. They've got one in London too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we're based, so that's where we put most of our money into collectively over the years.
So you do your recording mainly in Ireland?
Yeah. But we've recorded the last 3 albums on our own studio. The first being Serpent's Egg, which was recorded on the 13th floor of a tower block in a room. Well, to the end of this table, to the window, the entire album. Yeah. Luckily we have a view of the River Thames below us, so.
How do you feel about, it seems like when you were starting out there weren't many other bands doing a similar kind of thing. The last year or two it seems like there's been a lot of bands that have been influenced by you. For one, I thought that, I don't know if you've heard the record by Eden, it was almost like they were not copying you, but it was definitely,
The Roadrunner, aren't they?
That?
From Roadrunner, so like Third Mind.
So I just was curious if you how you felt about you had an influence. People have kind of been catching up with what you've been doing and kind of making things themselves.
It's kind of strange. I can see facets, perhaps, of an influence, but it's because I think our music is very diverse in its nature. It's all down to what facet people who you think may be influenced by our music have taken. Generally what I've heard that been pointed out to me has been people have saying this is some music we make, we're very influenced by you, and they're very honest in that, and they send us their music, and it's I've generally picked up on a more of a female vocalist They've gone for the ethereal aspects rather than the visceral. It's lacking the visceral nature. That's all I've heard up to date.
I've heard a couple of American bands lately, the last year or so, like smaller independent bands that are more, seem a lot more influenced by they're using more traditional forms to get across what they're doing.
Yeah.
So,
Good music?
what's that?
Is it good music?
Yeah.
That's what counts.
At the end of the day, yeah.
What about, you and Lisa have really, really different vocal styles. What kind of things influenced you as a vocalist? You're more of a crooner. She's more...
Crooner.
Yeah. We were noticing that. We were listening on the way in and we were noticing that, you were talking about how your voice...
New York.
Yeah.
This real,
I wasn't too far off.
Yeah.
Where
It's the cigars. That's what does it.
Really?
Cigars. Without these, I won't be a crooner. Be a Klingon. The first time I ever saw Lisa, before I even met her, she I remember seeing her. She used to have really long blonde hair. She used to wear a raincoat with black tights and high stiletto heels and play a piano accordion. She used to busk on the streets. And she used to sing Edith Piaf songs. And she didn't understand the words, but she knew how to sing the likeness of the words. And I was struck by this vision. It's very strong. Very strong vision. Her voice tends towards the melismatic and also singing in tongues. She'll willfully use her voice as a medium of unconscious expression, of improvisation. Without too much of the frontal lobe matter getting in the way. And as a result, it's a kind of free-form, more improvisationary approach. And my approach is very much dictated by my love of poetry and singers who I respect as having interpreted, who write great poetry and recite it in a more literal level. From Tim Buckley to Leonard Cohen to Scott Walker to Frank Sinatra. It's Tony Bennett. But yeah, I think it's down to what we feel comfortable at the end of the day with. It's only in recent times that Lisa's felt comfortable with expressing herself in a literal way by traditional songs on the new album, The Wind That Shakes the Barley, for instance.
Yeah, that was really nice. It was very different for her.
Yeah. But at the same time easy for her, coming from an Anglo-Irish background and knowing how to achieve the lilt and to be able to perform it in a correct way.
Did both of you grow up in Ireland, or when did you move to Australia?
Her father's Irish, her mother's English. My mother's Irish, my father's English. And we both have similar backgrounds in the sense that both our respective families migrated to the Antipodes. Mine went to New Zealand, hers went to Australia. So we come from a similar background in that sense. And then we met up in Melbourne in 79, and just hit it off immediately. I think the background aspect was important also. The kind of music we were making at the time was different. We were making very different music at the time. I came from a punk background, playing punk background at the time. She was into more of a busking improvisational mode, but she was in 3 bands doing very experimental music. And we lived together. We were lovers for about 2 years before we actually realised that we could actually find common ground musically between us. And that came with an opportunity presented by a friend of ours, Ron Rue, who wanted to record Lisa. He said, got a 4-track studio, come together and write some music, and she asked me to play percussion on it. And so we improvised something. There was no drums there, turned cans to percussion. It became Frontier. And then after that we realised that we can make really beautiful music together, and there is a common ground that we can there's a marriage there, basically, where we can balance each other's potentiality in that respect. So.
Do you see it as a long-term project, or do you ever? Yeah, do you see it as something you're going to just keep doing at this level, or do you think of it changing in terms of structure?
It's hard to say. I was asked like today, how do you perceive like your short-term ambitions or whatever? And I said basically to survive this press tour and get back to Ireland and not go home in a coffin. And in a sense that is it. We think of things in short term. We allow each other the space to be able to develop. If we're going to develop a part or pursue our own solo careers or whatever, that's there also. Having said that, I've just written a solo album which I'm putting out in the next spring. So, but that is something different from Death and Dance, And
something else I wanted to ask, going back a little bit, it just reminded me. The difference between the first 2 albums and the last, I guess, 4, it seemed like there was a big shift there when you started. The first 2 albums, I love the first album. It's one of my favorites. But it's much more of a, the instrumentation is what was common at the time, for the most part. And it seemed like after the second album, you kind of rethought, the way you approached the actual playing of the music. And I was wondering how that occurred to you, and like how you made that shift.
Process, yeah. Well, at that stage, I suppose we were traditionally more like a band then than we became later. We had a bass player and a drummer, and we'd share, like musically. We'd all have some degree of input into the music, and it became aware to me that the inner kind of musical visions that we had to translate into the instruments we were playing. And within the instruments we were playing, we found that we were locked into a role play. Became locked into a lull play. And decided just to sit back and say, look, we need to readdress this role play. Like instead of hearing a guitar line, which you play on the guitar, you could hear violins or strings or whatever for that particular part, or a drum or whatever. Instead of an electric bass, it was a double bass, or it was a bowed bass. It was a linear bass sound as opposed to a nodal bass sound. So decided to learn some classical theory, basically, and to start scoring for instruments. And at that time it coincided with the first kind of musical sequences that you could link into samplers, and you could write in music and have them play and perform and hear what you've written, rather than taking a cold classical approach and writing on the stave crotchets and bars and harmony and things, which wasn't us. We'd always been self-taught, done everything from the ear. So this was an invaluable tool as a stepping stone towards starting to draw out these musical visions and things that we had internally, and to do away with role play and sit back and start scoring. That's why there's a kind of a merging of rock with the classical on the Spleen and Ideal album. It's a synthesis of change.
The albums after that, like especially Serpent's Egg and Aeon, where you got really into the medieval and Renaissance music, Was that something that you were already really familiar with, or how did you like get yourself into that? Did you just kind of adapt that to your to your mode of playing, or did you kind of have to study it, or I mean, how did that?
Once again, it's by ear, by having a greater appreciation of that music by virtue of the fact there was a renaissance in early music societies occurring in the mid-80s to late 80s, and there was a lot of new recordings, releases on compact disc, and live performances of medieval societies, Renaissance societies performing this music. And it struck us how contemporary this music was and how alive, and it was being made vibrant because you could hear it live, for the first time, and you could actually buy the instruments in reproduction kind of shops, and so you had access to this. And this is what drew us to it. It wasn't only being able to listen to the CDs, being excited by the live performance, but also having access to the instruments, which is for us greater potentiality to find instruments which would convey the timbres, hues, colours of musics we could hear inside, and having a wider palette as a painter, many colours, in order to create tonal harmonies. And
I thought it added so much live too when I saw you. I mean, there was one thing that Lisa was playing that I was fascinated with. It was almost like it was a thing with little like things where she was.
a dulcimer, yeah. There's a Chinese dulcimer called a Yangqi.
That was gorgeous. It really added so much to what you were trying to do live.
Yeah, that's been pretty much a mainstay of music, even from the first album until the first album. So it's been there right throughout. If there's only one consistent instrument, it's the Yangqi.
It was something though that I'd never, listening to the records, I never thought of, imagining that that's what was making the sound. So when I saw it live, it was like, it was kind of a revelation. What was making it. When I saw you though, I was, interested that I didn't know most of the material, even though I had all the albums. A lot of the material I didn't know. Like, how do you approach live performances as separate from records? I mean, it's a really different thing for you, right?
Yeah, it's very much so. Maybe only 25% of the live set is culled from previously recorded material. The rest is improvised and original material written specifically for the tours. Yeah. There's two reasons for that. One is it generates music for the future. It allows greater interest for the musicians to become involved. If you're touring for 2 months, it's nothing worse than playing a set. It's the same every night, So we willfully use an open nodal improvisational structure. It kind of corresponds to like a raga system in that sense, where you still have parameters, but the parameters are kind of open. It's not totally free-form improvisation. The parameters that dictate are ones of sentiment, most importantly, of the scalic kind of apparatus you use, the instrumentation. So everyone is aware of what each other's doing, but they can converse with each other. No two performances are ever the same in that respect, and that's why it's like raga music, and that keeps the interest going.
Sure.
And it's down to the input of each individual musician every night, and it makes it exciting, and you can achieve some really dangerously beautiful music as a result of adopting this kind of system.
Do you find it easy to, find musicians who share this kind of vision, play with you, or do you kind of have to really search them out?
It's hard dealing with like session musicians, which we don't work with. It would be really quite traumatic to make them do things that are different. So we tend to get friends and people who are non-musicians, in fact, and we teach them how to play. there was a few on the last tour that never played these instruments before. We said, look, you have to play this instrument now, because we swap and change instruments. And it's like, okay, we have this piece, and okay, put down that drum. I want you to just play this line on this keyboard for us, because John, who plays keyboards, has to do this because he's very good at this. And it's basically, as a director, using the potentiality and swap him round like a big pizza, basically. Well, no, you're having problems with that. You try it, Dave. Get on that, and you try it. Yeah, that's better. Dave's got the hang of that. You try this. And that's how we work it out, And at the end of the day, it's better, because what you get from that, as far as we're concerned, is the love of friendship. Going through the process is perhaps one of the most important things within putting the set of material together, and it's really rewarding for everyone concerned. They can actually see how music can be shaped and brought together through the direction of myself and Lisa, working from nothing, basically, just an idea. And that's exciting, and that gives us so much pleasure and satisfaction, far more than actually having all the parts written and demoed, and then trying to make these people perform them or work hard for them, and like sweating a lot, and then being faced with the prospect of having to totally rearrange the music that you've worked for weeks to put together. It's much more organic. It kind of works better that way.
It said in the press release that you were touring in the fall. What was that?
Yeah, we'll be in America third week in October. Yeah, for about 2.5 weeks.
Question about your lyrics. I noticed that a lot of it is much based on mythology. I was wondering if that was an interest of yours.
The mythology runs counterpart to tradition and oral tradition generally. I guess it kind of, maybe it stems from the fascination as a child I had for fairy tales. It's strange to think that it's only in recent times that the psychologists, people who actually go into like the unconscious dream structures of the Homo sapien creatura that we are, have been able to make that link, that they are manifestations of a primeval level. I'm really interested in the primeval foundations that shape us. Knowing history and knowing how the superficial changes, the ornamental changes, but we're still essentially the same. We still have the same primeval worlds, the same drives, the same desires, whatever. It doesn't change, it's just the surroundings that change. So
the archetypes are still there.
Exactly. In a Jungian sense, it's the archetypical things which I think are the things which we should really address and respond to in terms of building an altruistic sensibility towards life and nature and evolution.
Do you see that then as a synergistic thing with your music? Because
what is synergistic?
Well, the fact that the music taps into a lot of the same things that those references do, just on a musical level as opposed to a psychological or a what would you call it, mythological level.
Yeah.
So you think they kind of work together?
Source things, yeah. Yeah, definitely. So we, in the West, with the supposed age of enlightenment, we have this concept that's been handed down to us, which we still cling to and believe. It's a modernistic disease. It's like that time is linear. It works in a straight line. And we're working to some pre-governed destiny future, and technology is a major part of the thing that's going to provide all the answers, and essentially will get us to this pre-governed state. within my experience and within the experience of looking at alternate societies' ways of thinking and the way nature is, my understanding of nature on an esoteric level as well as an objective level, an outsider's level, is that time works in cyclical emotions. So this, is it synergesis?
Synergy.
Yeah, it's like returning to a source. The way I understand it is like your sources interlocking. Works on a spiralic motion, of coming round and readdressing things which have to be readdressed. The more times you come round, the more times it becomes clearer to you and less obscure. So you have to deal with it. You know? It's like conscience being like a key of a reminder. It's part of the secular guide, perhaps, within the motion.
Do you also think it's interesting that it seems like now, for the first time in history, people, worldwide have greater access to not only the past, but it just seems like people aren't as fixed into their time period, but both, musically, culturally, in every other artistic way and social way, there's like, there's access to every other time in human history. And it's almost like the boundaries between periods are not as fixed.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I think it's really dangerous in a sense that I don't think you can truly achieve this through a total intellectualization. We live in an information culture where we have access to a lot of traditions and a lot of alternative lifestyle, or alternative ways of thinking. And generally, when you live in a city, that tends to come through the mediumship of books, music, movies. But it's never going to you're never really going to make a complete connection unless you do it and you're there. Because if I have one concept of a trinity in my life, it works through the basis of experience, knowledge, understanding. Which is interesting, in the Celtic folklore they call it the dagda. And it's three feminine faces, the three feminine cults that make up the Godhead. The Godhead is not one, it's made of a trinity, which is similar to Indus. And each of these feminine principles is experience, knowledge, understanding. You can't have knowledge of something you have no experience of, and you can't understand something without having knowledge. And you can't jump from one to the other. It has to go through that concourse. You have to experience first before you can have knowledge, before you can have understanding. So in that sense, yeah, we do have greater access to information or whatever, but it's dangerous, it's tenuous if we over-intellectualize it and we dislocate it even further into like really hip kind of like subcultures and wacko Davidian kind of interpretations of the Bible and whatever, that's different, but...
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So for you, does music perform that function of getting in touch with it, as experiencing it, as opposed to just, intellectualizing?
I think it's one of the stronger universal mediums. Perhaps the strongest universal medium that we have. Not at our disposal. I was going to say disposal. It's not disposable. At our something we can tap into. I see music as a river. It's a concourse of universality between peoples, where it becomes the same river. It's got nothing to do with the eyes. It's an internal
language either. It's like what you were saying in the beginning with Lisa singing Edith Piaf song. She didn't know French, but she was singing it. She didn't even understand the words. If you were a writer, you could only communicate to people, well, initially in English, if you were writing in English, unless it was translated for you, but it wouldn't be your exact words. With music, you can talk to anyone.
Yeah. I think it's because music comes into the ears that I think with the eyes and other aspects of our sensibility, we tend to censor them far more easily. The eye kind of lies in a sense, far more. Is more open to being what's the word? When you it's related to desire. When you sophistry, seduce. There's a seduction with the eye. It's like very pleasing colours and things, whatever. There's a non-selectiveness in the eye. Whereas with the ear, I think it's more selectiveness in terms of filtering things out and what comes in, or vibration. In a city, though, you have problems in this sense. There's a desensitization process. When you live here for a while, you don't realise that there's all these strange agitation of resonances happening with your body, with the traffic and the rumbling that's here. If you live in the country,
going underneath the ground.
Exactly. If you live in 6 months, I come here and it's like total bombardment. It's like being massaged in totally the wrong way. And we all know what a massage is, when it's done right. It works along contours and lines, alleviating to perhaps Kundalini-esque kind of aspects with this energy balance. But cities tend to rub you up all the wrong way because of there's no focus, there's no sensitivity or sensibility working with it. It's about friction.
Do you find where you live that do you like cut yourself off somewhat from modern culture, or
no.
do you find,
No, I'm a sociopath by nature. I think most people are, aren't they? They're pathologically social. There's a lot of people where I live who have cabin fever. That's because they've cut themselves up, and they're lonely old men who go a bit crazy, No, I socialise. It's nice to have both worlds. I live like 3 miles from the nearest village, so if I choose to be alone, I can be alone. It's nice coming to the church where I live. Pass over a stone bridge, I pass over water, and there's something about passing over water where you feel like you've left a place
safe.
Safe, or there's a feeling of transmigration, of transcendence.
So is there anything else you have, projects you're working on that people should know about, or?
Well, apart from the solo project,
is that completed already, or have you started working on it?
It's been written. I performed a concert at the 4AD 13th anniversary in London. Had a week of 4AD nights there, and it went really well. And when we finish the world tour, I'm going to record it pretty much live, and hopefully it'll be released next spring.
Same on 4AD?
Yeah.
And you don't look any further than that, or do you have
that's enough to get on with for the time being. I find if I put my energies around in too many places, I'm going to lose something at the end of the day. There's actually, I'm going into a partnership with a friend. We're forming an independent record company in Ireland, first truly independent record company. Why do you snigger?
Because everything's independent now. How independent it is, I don't know. And especially in Ireland, which most people think right now is the most popular. Next to Seattle, this country, it's definitely, as far as Europe's concerned, would you say, that Ireland's the Seattle of Europe. I mean, it's where everything's coming from, basically.
Is it?
Well,
Like what?
a lot of people don't.
Some movie, yeah.
Yeah. But these are people assigned to major companies that have established
Right.
themselves in Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, the only alternative is something U2 created called Mother Records. But that's not an independent company because that is part of the major network. It has an supposedly independent face because it's representing local Irish talent, but it doesn't. It
Very
really
hard for
doesn't.
them to be independent now.
Yes. No, we have our own independent distribution. We go through a cartel in Britain, and our ethos is to bring in records from licensees around the world whose records wouldn't necessarily appear on record shelves in Ireland. It's a very conservative market. It's the smallest record market in Western Europe. People buy more records in Portugal than the Irish do.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding, no. It's barren, but Ireland's greatest export is its people. Remember that, and it kind of
Yeah,
you get a
okay.
kind of perspective of things, you know.
Okay. Well, that was about all I needed to ask. I'll let you